The hall shimmered with golden light, chandeliers casting soft glows over the marble floors of the grand ballroom. A string quartet played something slow and elegant in the corner, and the scent of roses floated in from every corner of the decorated space. Laughter echoed gently as men in black suits and women in silken gowns floated from table to table, glasses of champagne clinking in casual conversation. It was the annual gala to raise funds for underprivileged schools, but for many in the room, it was more about appearances than cause. Mira Ellis stood near the back, feeling like a misplaced ornament among polished gems. Her navy blue dress, borrowed from her Aunt Greta, fit her modest frame, but lacked the shimmer of those around her. She held a glass of water tightly in her hand, eyes flicking from face to face, trying to make sense of why she'd agreed to come at all. Greta had insisted. "Just smile, darling," her aunt had said, brushing her hair earlier. "You'll be helping a good cause, and who knows, maybe someone will notice you." Someone did. The auctioneer's voice echoed across the hall. "Next, up on our charity dinner auction list, we have a very special young lady, Mira Ellis, a student of literature, here tonight thanks to the generosity of her aunt." There was a murmur. Mira froze. She turned to Greta, stunned. "What is this?" she whispered, heart racing. "I didn't agree to this." Greta gave a dismissive smile. "It's just dinner, Mira. One night. It raises money for children's schools. Don't embarrass yourself." Before Mira could process anything further, the bidding had started. Numbers rose like waves: 500, 1,000, 1,500. She stood there on that small platform, cheeks flushed, eyes wide. She felt exposed, like she wasn't even a person anymore, just a gesture in a glamorous game. She scanned the crowd, and then she saw him. He didn't raise his voice or wave his paddle. He simply lifted two fingers, expression unreadable, tall, composed, dressed in a tailored black suit, with a white pocket square. His face carried the cool stillness of someone used to commanding attention. The auctioneer's voice lifted. 20,000, Mr. Elias Devon, ladies and gentlemen." Gasps fluttered through the room. Mira felt the floor tilt under her. After the applause faded and the lights dimmed for the next item, Elias approached her. "Miss Ellis," he said smoothly, offering his hand. "Mira," she said, quietly, placing her hand in his. His grip was firm, but not demanding. His eyes, pale gray and sharp, seemed to study her more than see her. "It's just dinner," he added. "Nothing more, unless you want it to be." Mira forced a smile. "I appreciate your generosity," she replied, though her stomach churned. She wasn't sure if she meant the donation or his restraint. They walked side by side to his car, the driver opening the door without a word. Inside, soft jazz played on low volume. Elias didn't speak for several moments. Finally, he glanced at her. "Did your aunt tell you about the auction?" "No," she said, too tired to lie. He nodded slowly. "You look surprised." Mira looked out the window, watching the city lights blur. "I felt like a prop." "You were," he replied, "but not by me." The car moved quietly through the city, two strangers sitting inches apart, each hiding their discomfort behind practiced calm. Neither of them knew it yet, but this night this unexpected arrangement was going to change everything. The car moved silently through the city as towers of glass reflected the night sky, and streetlights traced gold along the edges of the windows. But inside the luxury vehicle, the air felt tighter than the space deserved. Mira sat with her hands folded neatly in her lap, her fingers twisting slightly, though she tried to appear composed. Elias didn't speak again until they crossed the river, his voice smooth and even like the sound of water sliding over stones. "Don't like crowds," he said. Casually, "they pretend to admire causes they don't care about, and they pretend to know people they can't remember, but sometimes something unexpected happens like tonight." Mira turned to him, unsure if he was being kind or calculating. "Your bid was generous," she said, her voice soft, still uncertain if she was supposed to thank him or question him. "You don't do anything unless I want to," he replied, watching her with a gaze that didn't blink. "You didn't know about the auction, but you didn't panic. You stood there with dignity that's rare." Her cheeks warmed. She wasn't used to compliments, especially not ones that felt so sharply observant. "Thank you," she whispered, unsure what to say to a man who studied people like business deals. watched her for another beat, then looked away. We're almost there. Where is there? She asked, thinking of some rooftop restaurant or a glittering private club somewhere. Only the rich belonged, you'll see, he said with the barest smile, but something in his tone didn't sound like seduction. It sounded like something deeper, like distraction. When the car finally stopped, they weren't in front of a velvetrope venue or a towering building. Instead, it was a modest diner on a quiet street by the water, its windows fogged from warmth. Inside, the sign flickering above the door read Helen's. Myra looked at him, puzzled. This isn't what I expected. Good, Elias said, stepping out and circling the car to open her door. The night air was cooler, here quieter. He held the door open for her with a gesture that felt less like a performance and more like habit, not forced, not expected, just real. Inside, the diner smelled of coffee and fresh bread, and the older woman behind the counter looked up with surprise and delight when she saw Elias. Well, if it isn't the ghost himself, she said, wiping her hands on her apron and coming around to hug him. You haven't been here in 2 years. He needed to remember something real tonight, Elias said gently. And this is Mira. Mira smiled politely as the woman took her hand, warm and familiar, a complete contrast to the world she'd just left. They sat in a corner booth by the window, the rain beginning to dot the glass gently. The silence between them was not uncomfortable, but charged. Mira studied him from across the table. His sharp suit looked too expensive for this place, but he didn't seem out of place. He looked like he belonged because he wasn't trying to impress anyone. We did you really bring me here? She asked. Finale leaned back in the booth and tilted his head. You're not like them, and I'm tired of pretending to be. I wanted a night without scripts. You being there tonight wasn't planned, but it felt like something that made sense. You don't know me, Mira said, not defensively, but honestly. I nodded. I want. Tosh blinked, surprised not by the words, but by the way he said them, quietly, without agenda, without the usual power behind them. I don't have much to offer. You know, I'm just a student who works part-time and lives with an aunt who thinks glitter means success. Smiled, then a real one, not the charming mask, but something softer. I built an empire because I thought money would silence the chaos in my head. It didn't. What you have the ability to be still in a room full of noise. That's more valuable than anything I own. Myra looked down, her hands now resting on the table. The waitress brought their coffee and pie, and they both thanked her, as if they weren't two people from opposite worlds sitting in a borrowed pieces. The minutes passed, their conversation deepened. They talked about favorite book stories that stuck with them long after the last page. Mira spoke of childhood memories, quiet gardens, poems that made her cry. Elias shared how he used to draw as a child, how he lost his mother when he was 16, how he built his company out of grief and fire. You don't have to pretend with me, she said gently, and he looked up, eyes darker now, more tired. I didn't know that was still possible. And the check came. Elias paid with a quiet nod and no fanfare. Mira stood slowly, still unsure how she'd come to feel safer with this stranger than she did at home. They stepped outside. The rain, now soft and steady, soaking the street in silver light. Let me take you back, Elias offered. But she hesitated. He don't want to go back yet. He held out his arm. Then walk with me. No expectations, no destination, just a walk. She took his arm, not knowing that the single decision would unravel everything. She thought she understood about men power and what it means when someone sees your worth without ever asking to take anything in return. Neither of them spoke for a long time, the sound of rain and quiet steps filling the space between them, but both of them felt it, the pull, the beginning of something dangerous and kind and utterly unplanned. And for the first time in a long time, Elias Devon didn't want control. He just wanted to stay exactly where he was, walking through the rain with a girl who had no idea how powerful her silence was. He walked through the quiet city streets like to ghosts who didn't belong to the world around them. The rain had turned to a fine mist, clinging to their hair and eyelashes, softening the glow of the streetlights and painting the pavement with a watery sheen. But neither of them hurried. Neither of them reached for umbrellas or checked their phones. They just walked as if the silence between them was the only sound that mattered, as if time had slowed down. Just to listen. Mira's shoes were damp, but she didn't complain. Her fingers brushed Elias's arm every now and then, and every time they touched he felt it like a jolt, not of desire, but of recognition. Like her presence reminded him of something he'd forgotten long ago, something gentle and good. You are not like them, Elias said again, not looking at her, his voice low, like a confession, like he was saying it To himself more than Heron, "You're not like I thought you'd be," she replied softly. "I expected someone colder, more distant, someone who wouldn't care about rain or pie or bookstore." Ash chuckled quietly. "I used to be all those things. Maybe I still am." They passed a row of shuttered shops with dark windows, the world asleep, while they wandered through its dreams. When they reached the corner of a small park, Elias stopped, suddenly turned to her, his expression unreadable. "I need to ask you something." Shh. Blinked, rain dripping from her lashes, her voice steady. "Ask her." "You afraid of meth?" Question hit her like thunder, and for a moment she forgot to breathe. Her instinct was to lie, to say no, to smooth over the tension, but something about the way he asked it, so open, so vulnerable, made her choose truth. She whispered, "But not in the way you think. I'm afraid because I don't understand why someone like you would choose someone like me." Elias looked away for a moment, like the words struck deeper than she knew. "I don't think I chose you. I think maybe you just showed up." And everything that came before stopped making sense. He stood there in the hush of the city, as a breeze moved through the trees, leaves rustling like secrets. Then he did something that surprised them both. He reached out and touched her cheek, not possessively, not like someone claiming a prize, but with a reverence that didn't belong in a man like him. "You're soaked," she said, her voice a little breathless. "Oh, are Yowans still?" Neither of them moved back. "Come with me," he said finally. "I want to show you something. Where me place, but not for what you're thinking." He added quickly, seeing the flicker of hesitation in her eyes, "I swear to you, Mira, no expectations, no games, just warmth and maybe a fire." Mira hesitated for a moment longer, the street quiet, the air thick with 1,000 things unsaid. Then she nodded and followed him back to the cart. Drive to his penthouse was quiet, but not empty. Every glance, every shared breath was charged with something unspoken, something that danced on the edge of danger and trust. When they arrived, the elevator ride up felt like climbing into another world. The doors opened to a space filled with warm wood, soft lighting, and walls lined with books. Not the cold, sleek metal she expected, but a place that looked lived in, even loved. "You live here alone?" she asked, stepping inside. As he held the door open, "Eyes," he said quietly, "always alone." Until No took her coat and handed her a thick robe, soft and oversized. She disappeared into a guest room to change, while he lit the fireplace in the main room. When she returned, the robe swallowed her frame, her hair still damp, her cheeks pink from the heat of the room or something else. She sat cross-legged on the plush rug near the fire, watching the flames, while he brought her tea. "You don't owe me anything, Mira," he said, placing the cup beside Harry. "No, you were not here because of the auction. You're here because I needed to remember what it felt like to breathe around someone who doesn't want anything from me." Mira looked at him, then really looked, and saw it, not the power, not the wealth, but the weight he carried in his shoulders, in his eyes, like someone who'd built a throne but forgot to build a home. He sat in silence, watching the fire. When Elias spoke again, his voice was softer. "My mother used to read to me. In front of a fireplace like this, she'd brush my hair back and tell me stories about people who chose love even when it was inconvenient. I forgot those stories until tonight." Myra reached for the book sitting near the hearth, opened it without looking at the title, and began to read aloud, her voice calm, steady, the words wrapping around them like a blanket. And as she read, Elias Devon didn't feel like a millionaire, didn't feel like a man made of steel and strategy. He felt like a boy again, sitting at his mother's knee, eyes wide, heart open. When her voice trailed off and silence settled again, Elias leaned toward her close enough to feel the warmth of her breath, but not touching. "Not yet. I want to kiss you," he said, "but only if you want me to." Mira looked into his eyes and nodded. Just onset. The kiss was soft, careful, not rushed, not hungry, but full of something deeper, a slow surrender of walls and defenses, a quiet agreement between two souls unsure of what came next, but willing to find out together. And when the kiss ended, neither of them spoke, because some moments are too fragile to break with words. Neither of them knew it yet, but the fire that had started between them tonight was not one of destruction. It was one of transformation, and it would burn through everything they thought they knew about love, desire, and what it meant to truly wait for something worth keeping. The rain had stopped, but the storm was still inside them. It lived in the soft glances they kept stealing, the kind that burned without touching. It breathed in the heavy quiet that hung between them after the kiss, like the air knew something had changed, like time itself was leaning in, waiting for the next moment to unfold slowly, dangerously, deliberately. Mira sat still in the oversized robe, her lips parted just slightly from the Kiss her hands curled in her lap, trying to hold on to the silence without shattering it. She could hear the ticking of the wall clock, the crackle of the fire, and her own heart pounding. Like a warning, or maybe a Kalalea sat across from her, his elbows resting on his knees, his head bowed like a man caught between wanting and restraint. His voice was barely above a whisper. When he finally spoke, "I should walk away from you right now." She looked up, startled. "Wibcaus, if I don't, I won't be able to stop." Lifted his gaze to her, and there was no seduction there, only honesty raw. And trembling, she nodded, slowly standing to her feet and taking one small step toward him. Then another. "I don't want you to stop," she said, but her voice wasn't flirtatious, it wasn't confident. It was laced with something far more powerful. Vulnerability. Trust stood to the air between them, electric now, charged with every choice they were about to make. He reached for her hand and brought it to his chest. "Feel this," he said. "Do you feel it? This isn't lust, Mira. It's something else, something I don't have a name for." "Then don't name it," she whispered. "Just let it be." He leaned in slowly, watching her every breath, every blink, giving her time, space, a chance to turn away, but she didn't. Their lips met again, this time deeper, slower, their hands finding each other in the dark. Like stars reaching through the sky, he lifted her carefully, as if she were made of something that could break. Not physically, but something far more sacred, and without a word, he carried her through the quiet apartment into the bedroom, where soft light spilled across the sheets and the world outside vanished. He set her down at the edge of the bed, his hands moving with reverence, not hunger. He kissed her jaw, her shoulder, the inside of her wrist, each touch asking for permission. And every time she answered with a shiver, a nod, a breathless yish. Untied the robe, and it slipped from her shoulders, pooling at her feet. She stood there in the dim light, bare and trusting, her eyes wide, not with fear, but with something deeper, courage. And then it happened, a moment so small and yet so loud, the kind of moment that splits time into before and after. A drop of red on the sheet. Elias froze, his breath catching in his throat. Mira followed his gaze, and when she saw it, she flinched, wrapping the robe back around her body in one motion. Her arms crossed over her chest, her voice shaking. "I'm sorry, I didn't think it would. I didn't expect." But Elias didn't move. He stared at the red stain, not with disgust, not with judgment, but with something else, something that looked like pain and reverence and sorrow all at once. "You're a virgin," he said softly, not as a question, but as a realization. She nodded, her eyes filling fast with tears. "I thought I was ready. I thought this was right." Booth stepped back like something sacred had just been revealed, like he wasn't supposed to touch her anymore. He ran a hand through his hair, turning away as if to catch his breath or gather what was left of it. Mira sat back on the edge of the bed, the shame curling around her chest like cold fingers. She whispered, "I didn't mean to make it." Weirdly, as turned slowly, and there was something in his eyes, something fierce and shaken and unbelievably gentle. "Mira, this isn't weird, this is holy." She looked up, stunned, confused. Wade walked back to her, knelt in front of her, took her hands. "You trusted me with this part of you without even knowing it, and I almost took it without thinking, without understanding how rare, how sacred that trust is." Her lip trembled. "I thought this was what people do when they feel something." "It is," he said, "but the difference is that what I feel for you doesn't belong to tonight. It belongs to something bigger. And I refuse to take the beginning of something pure and turn it into another broken story." She didn't speak, and he didn't push. Instead, he stood, walked to the dresser, pulled out a blanket, and gently draped it over her shoulders like armor. "You don't have to give me anything, Mira, not tonight, not ever, unless you want to, not because you think I expect." Their eyes filled, her throat closed and still. She nodded, because there were no words big enough for what she felt. Elias walked to the door, paused, as if to say something more, then changed his mind. "I'll be on the couch," he said softly. "Good night, Mira." The door closed behind him, and she sat alone in the quiet room, wrapped in a blanket, and wonder. Her heart cracked wide open, not from pain, but from something else, something she had never known before, a kind of kindness that asked for nothing, a kind of love that waited down the hall. Elias lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The red stain burned into his mind, not as a memory of what could have happened, but as a line he chose not to cross. And in that moment, he made a promise to himself, a promise no one would believe, no one would understand, would wait, not because she asked him to, but because he finally understood what it meant to be worthy of something that could not be bought, could not be earned, only honored. And that night, the millionaire who could have had anything did the one thing no one expected. He walked away so that someday, if she chose him, it would be with both eyes open, both hands free and all the power still in her heart, untouched, unbroken. Completely hushed morning came slowly, like a secret being whispered through the gray clouds outside. Elias sat on the edge of the sofa in silence, his elbows resting on his knees, his hands still gripping the blanket he hadn't used all night. The city beyond the windows moved as if nothing had happened, as if the night before had not changed the way he saw the world, but it had, and now every breath he took felt heavier, because he knew what he'd walked away from, and more importantly, why. In the guest room, Mira stirred, the warmth of the blanket still wrapped around her, like the memory of something gentle, something that hadn't hurt like she thought it might. She blinked against the soft light that crept through the curtains, her hand brushing the note left beside her pillow. The paper trembled slightly as she unfolded. Edie didn't leave because I didn't want you. I left because I want you more than one night could ever hold. Elias. Myra pressed the note to her chest, her eyes wide with something too big to name, something that frightened her, not because it felt wrong, but because it felt real in a way nothing had before. When she stepped into the hallway, she found him standing by the window, one hand tucked into his pocket, the other holding a cup of black coffee. He turned when he heard her bare feet on the wooden floor, and for a moment neither of them spoke. Good morning, she said, her voice unsure. Good morning, he replied, his tone warm but careful, like a man holding back the tide. Thank you for last night. You don't have to thank me, Mariah. Do, she said. I need to. Nodded, then gestured to the small breakfast spread laid out on the kitchen island. Toast, eggs, berries, coffee, everything warm, everything ready, as if he'd been waiting not just this morning, but for something longer. They sat together across from each other, slowly eating in the kind of silence that holds space for thoughts too large to say out loud. Mira spoke first between bites. My aunt's going to ask questions. What will you tell her? That nothing happened to Dan. Will that be true? She looked at him, eyes steady. Yes, but not because nothing mattered, because it did too. Muckalia smiled, then the kind of smile that didn't touch his lips as much as his eyes, the kind that belonged to a man who had once learned how to hide, but was slowly remembering how not to. When she left later that morning, her heart felt heavier than when she'd arrived, but not with regret. It was the kind of weight that came from carrying something valuable and not knowing what to do with it. Yet the following days passed in quiet flutters, messages exchanged at odd hours, a photo of a book cover, a quote she thought he might like, a single sunflower emoji sent by him with no explanation, that made her laugh in the middle of a shift at the bookstore. But the quiet between them was soon disturbed, not by emotion, but by exposure. A photo came out on a gossip blog, two of them standing outside the diner that night, her in the borrowed navy dress, him with his hand lightly on her back. The caption read, Millionaire's mystery girl caught after auction night. Myra stared at it on her phone, hands shaking. Her professor whispered her name in concern. As she sat frozen in the back of class, her classmates began to glance in her direction, like the story had crawled out of the screen and wrapped itself around her like chains at home. Her aunt was livid. The phone had not stopped ringing. Who did you tell? Mira. Who did you let near him? He didn't say anything, Mira insisted, but her voice was hollow, drowned by the rising wave of shame and confusion. Elias called her that night, his voice urgent. Mira, I'm so sorry. I didn't think they'd follow you. As I tried to keep it quiet. He can't go to school without being stared at, she said. I can't even breathe without someone asking if I sold myself to a billionaire. You didn't, he said firmly. You shared one moment with me, and they turned it into a circus. So what do we do? No. There was silence for a moment, then Elias said something unexpected. We make them see the truth. They'll be living it. Well, nights later he arrived at her bookstore, unannounced, holding a single copy of Wuthering Heights and a bag of sunflower seeds for her garden. He walked inside as if the cameras weren't flashing outside, as if the world wasn't watching, as if she was the only thing that mattered. Edwin. He reached the counter. She looked up, tears threatening again from the weight of it all, and he said quietly, so only she could hear, may I take you to dinner? Not because anyone is watching, but because I can't stop thinking about you. She stared at him, the answer trembling on her lips. Yes, she said finally. Yes, you can. And as they walked out together into the light of 100 flashing bulbs, Mira reached for his hand, not because she had to, but because she wanted tone. That was the moment the world began to see something they couldn't twist. A love that refused to be ashamed of its beginning. A man who had everything, choosing the girl who had nothing but heart and the courage to give it. But even then, as they disappeared into the night, Mira didn't know that someone else had been watching. Not the cameras, not the bloggers, but a man with eyes colder than money, and a voice that would soon threaten everything they'd begun to build. His name was Reuben Hale, and he wasn't interested in love, he was interested in leverage, and Mira had just become the key to unlocking Elias's most dangerous secret. Sky that evening looked like bruised silk, soft clouds folding into one another, touched with the last gold light of day, but beneath the beauty something darker was moving unseen. Quiet and deliberate like the shifting of tectonic plates, the world on the surface calm, while everything beneath prepared to break. Elias stood at the center of it all, calm on the outside. As always, tailored suit, clean lines, polished shoes, eyes that held entire storms behind them, but inside he was already unraveling, already bracing for the blow he knew was coming. Mira was upstairs in his study reading through a manuscript he'd shown her weeks ago, something he'd written during a dark chapter of his life, words never meant to be published, raw and jagged like wounds that hadn't healed. But she read them anyway, and her silence afterward had told him everything he needed to hear. You were in pain then, she had said, and somehow still found the words to help others, not destroy them. How remembered her voice as he stared out the penthouse window, hands clasped behind his back. His phone buzzed on the counter beside him, and without looking he knew the message would break the evening in half. When he picked it up, the screen read, "Unknown sender." The image that appeared took the air from his lungs. Mira alone in the bookstore, caught through the window. A close-up of her smile followed by another, her entering his car the night of the gala, and then the final photo, her robe slipping from her shoulder as she walked to the guest room, caught by someone watching from a rooftop opposite his building. His grip tightened, the glass of the phone cracking slightly along the corner. A message appeared below. The photo's reputation is delicate. What would the board think? What would the world think? Call me before midnight. Reuben Halith, name tasted bitter in his mouth, like rust and regret. A rival in business, but more than that, a man who didn't believe in lines, who saw people as pieces, power as a weapon, love as a weakness. Elias didn't call. He walked slowly upstairs into the study, where Mira looked up from the manuscript with a smile that made the weight in his chest worse. What's wrong? She asked, immediately standing up. When she saw his face, what happened? Ed didn't speak for a moment, just walked over, took the book from her hand and set it gently on the desk. He looked into her eyes, and the storm inside him calmed enough to find words. Someone's watching us. Didn't flinch, didn't gasp, only blinked once slowly, then nodded and asked the one question that would define everything. From this moment forward, what do we do about it? Elias breathed like a man surfacing from deep water. You go home for now, he said quietly. I need to fix this. No, she said with steel in her voice, not this time. You don't get to carry everything alone. We're in this together. Remember, they're threatening you. Mira, he said, his voice sharp, not because he was angry with her, but because the thought of someone using her to get to him was enough to set his blood on fire. They're threatening what we are, she corrected, and I'm not running, but what if it gets worse? He asked. What if they say things? What if they ruin your name, your career, your peace? Then they'll find out. I don't break easy, she said, taking his hand. I'm not just a girl in a bookstore anymore. Elias, you kissed that part of me goodbye when you chose to wait. Pulled her into his arms, pressed his forehead against hers. God, I didn't want this. I wanted to protect you. I did, she whispered. You still are, but you need to trust that I can protect you too, in different ways. Stared at her for a long moment, then nodded once slowly, and it was like handing over half his soul to someone else for the first time in years. That night, they sat together on the rooftop of his building, watching the city below, their hands entwined, their backs against the wind, Mira's head resting on his shoulder as the future unraveled in front of them, full of unknowns, full of shadows. Down in the dark heart of the city, Reuben Hale sat behind a glass desk, sipping wine, staring at the live security footage of Elias's building, his mouth curled into a smile that never reached his eyes. Let them fight, he murmured. Let them believe in their little flame. Love is beautiful when it burns. Then he pressed send on another email, this one addressed to the board of directors of Devon Industries, attaching the same photos and a short message below. As your CEO forgotten what discretion means? Ran with that the storm truly began. In the days that followed, everything changed. Elias was called into emergency meetings. Headlines exploded across the business world. Mystery woman costs CEO credibility. Anonymous sources feeding lies dressed as facts. Whispers of scandals, of exploitation, of weakness. Myra was pulled into it all like a thread in a spinning wheel. Her image splashed across blogs, her name twisted, her motives questioned. Even her students started whispering the kind things they used to say, replaced by doubt planted by cruel strangers, and yet she never asked him to walk away. She stood beside him during the worst of it, holding his hand during board meetings, sitting silently behind him as executives picked apart his decisions, her eyes never flinching, her strength never bending. They were trying to bury him, and she became the reason he stayed above ground. Then came the final blow, a public letter from Ruben accusing Elias of funneling money from his company to fund Mira's life apartment tuition, and Almira broke down then, not from shame, but from the weight of being used again, this time as a weapon, not by Elias, but by someone who had never even met here. Liaz held her in the dark that night, whispering into her hair, "I will fix this, Mira, I swear to. You, I'll burn the whole empire down before I let them use you again." "Oh," she whispered back. "Don't burn it, fix it, show them who you are, show them who we arraigned." In that moment, Elias Devon, the millionaire who had once built his world in silence, decided he would no longer hidden it, his love, not his truth, not the woman who made him believe in something greater than power, because the blood that night had shown him more than innocence. It had shown him purpose, and he would fight to protect it, even if it meant starting a war he could not afford to lose. Morning light didn't bring peace. It brought headly screens across the city, lit up with words soaked in venom and half-truths. Powerful CEO under scrutiny for inappropriate relationship. Insider claims misuse of company funds. Identity of mystery woman revealed. Mira Ellis, art student or gold digger. The stories were everywhere. Radio anchors spoke her name with speculation. Television panels dissected her photos, and blogs called her the downfall of an empire. In the middle of that storm, Elias Devon sat in a room full of board members who once shook his hand and now avoided his eyes. Behind closed doors, they tossed numbers and reputations back and forth like dice, each whisper another dagger to his credibility. But he didn't flinch, not once, because outside that room, Mira waited. And she had never once flinched for him. One of the older executives cleared his throat. "Elias, we appreciate your transparency, but the situation is rapidly evolving. It may be time to step down voluntarily to protect the company." Protect it from what? Elias asked coldly. From honesty, from love, from someone finally choosing decency over Damagathis. Isn't about decency, it's about liability. The man replied firm. "This is business, not personal." "No," he said, standing slowly. "This is exactly personal. That's the problem. Too many of you built your empires by hiding behind polished smiles and bloodless numbers. You forgot that people are part of the equation." The room fell silent. "He will not step down," Elias continued, "not because of pride, but because stepping down would mean admitting guilt where there is none. Because this company was built with my hands, and because I finally found something worth building it for." "And what would that be?" came a voice from the back, sharp, mocking. "A new merger, perhaps with a bookstore." Elias turned to face Reuben Hale, who had entered without invitation, but with smug entitlement printed on his every move. His smile was sharp, his suit immaculate, and his presence unwelcome. "Reuben," he said smoothly, "I was wondering when the spider would crawl into the room." The board shifted in their seats, sensing the heat that was about to rise. "You've had a good run, Elias," Reuben said casually, "but we both know your little romantic adventure is going to cost you everything. I simply gave it a push over the edge." Elias asked, his voice low to calm, "What did you gain from humiliating her, from poisoning something you never understood?" "Power," Reuben said with a shrug, "the ability to remind you that feelings make you soft, predictable, but tably. You mistake kindness for weakness," Elias replied, "and love for leverage. But what I have with her isn't something you can destroy, because it wasn't built on secrets. It was built on choice." "Choice," Reuben echoed with a laugh. "You think the public cares about choice? They care about optics, and right now you're sinking, and she's the weight pulling you down." Elias leaned forward and said something that made the room hold its breath. "Then let's see how well I swim." An hour later, he called a press conference. Cameras flashed like lightning. Reporters screamed his name, but when he stepped onto the stage, he didn't look like a man cornered. He looked like a man reborn. Mira stood just behind the curtain, watching, heart thundering, chest tight, her hands clasped over her stomach, not because she was afraid, but because she was filled with something too enormous to hold. "Thank you for being here," Elias began. "I know the world's been watching closely lately. Some of you came hoping for scandal, others for answers, and today you'll get both." Gasps rippled through the crowd. He met Mira Ellis at a charity gala. What happened that night wasn't planned, it wasn't rehearsed, it wasn't convenient, but it was real. She is not a scandal, she is not a mistake, she is not a burden, she is the woman who reminded me what it means to be human. So mean, shouted from the press pit. Are you denying the accusations that you used company funds? Elias shook his head. No, I'm not denying it, because there's nothing to deny. Every expense has already been documented, paid for out of my personal account. I anticipated this attack, and I've prepared for it. What you should be asking is who paid for the surveillance? Who sold private images to the media? Who stalked a woman for nothing more than daring to be loved? Dana, the reporter, asked. Then what are you saying, Mr. Devon? I'm saying this ends now, Elias replied. I'm saying that I built this company with integrity, and I'll defend it with the same. I'm saying that if loving someone publicly costs me investors, clients, or titles, so be it. His voice dropped to something quiet, something powerful. I'd rather lose every dollar than live one more day in a world where doing the right thing is a liability. The room was stunned. The flashbulbs stopped clicking for just a moment, and in that breathless silence, Mira stepped onto the stage beside him. She didn't say a word, she just took his hand, and the gesture screamed louder than any sound could. Later, as the footage spread across networks, the reaction shocked even them. Hashtags erupted. Mira deserves better. Elias Devon stood up. Stand with love, corporate courage. Support flooded in from unexpected corners. Former employees, customers, community leaders speaking out about Elias's past generosity, his fair treatment of workers, his support for mental health initiatives, his anonymous donations. Investors called back deals, revived, the stock rebounded, and Ruben's smug grin twisted into a scowl when the board declined his offer to buy controlling interest and instead publicly voted to keep Elias as CEO. But that wasn't the true victory. The true victory came later that night. In the quiet of Elias's penthouse, Mira sat curled on the couch, her eyes finally closed, her head resting against his chest and his hand resting gently against her stomach. Hours just before the press conference, she had whispered 3 words into his ear that made everything else blur into silence. I'm pregnant. Elias hadn't responded at first, not with words, but with a kiss so full of love and disbelief. It made her trembling now as he held her close, staring out at the city that had tried to devour them both and failed. He knew hadn't just protected her innocence, he had protected their beginning. He had chosen something rare, something no one ever expected a man like him would choose. Not power, not control, but love, and the legacy it would leave behind him. For the first time in his life, Elias Devon was not afraid of the future, because she was in it, and so was the child they had made together. In a world that tried to tear them apart and failed miserably, City slept differently now, as if it too had exhaled after holding its breath for days, as if the storm that had once roared across rooftops and headlines had finally passed. But beneath the silence, something darker still pulsed, something that hadn't surrendered, something that wasn't finished. Elias Devon knew better than to celebrate too early. Victories in his world were never permanent, they were just pauses in the war, and somewhere in those pauses, men like Ruben Hale plotted, not because they had a cause, but because they hated peace. The glow of the press conference had barely faded when the next move struck swift and unseen. A call came at midnight, not to Elias, but to Mira. Her phone vibrated once, twice, then rang with a number she didn't recognize. She answered with sleep still in her voice. Myra Ellis came, a voice smooth and calm to calm. We haven't officially met. I'm Ruben Hale. Myra sat up slowly in bed, every instinct in her spine going cold. Why are you calling me? Because I want to offer you something, he said, and I think you'll want to hear it. Don't want anything from you. That's a shame, he replied, but expected. What I'm offering is freedom from what comes next. You don't understand. Oh, you will. When the medical report hits the networks, when the rumors start, when the investors realize you've been hiding something, you're threatening me. No, Miss Ellis, I'm warning you. Elias has made enemies, some with deeper pockets than you can imagine. I suggest you ask him about the file marked November 26, the one hidden behind the third panel of his office bookshelf. Ask him what it means, and then decide whether you're willing to bleed for a man who hasn't told you everything. Oh, hung up without another word. Myra sat frozen, her hands trembling, her heartbeat frantic, not from fear, but from the sudden jolt of doubt. Not in Elias, but in what she didn't know about him. She slipped out of bed quietly, wrapped herself in a robe, and walked to his office. Her bare feet silent against the floor. The panel was exactly where Ruben had said, third shelf left corner, disguised as would but loose just enough to be pried open behind it a single file thick, and sealed with a black cord. Her hands shook as she untied it page after page of confidential memos, emails, financial breakdowns, and one word at the center of it. Al-Azrash heard the soft shuffle of footsteps behind her, then Elias's voice, low and raw. "I was going to tell you." She turned slowly, her eyes wide with hurt. "Why didn't you?" "Because I was afraid of what it would mean for us, because I wanted to protect you from the part of my life that doesn't make sense in daylight." What is a Zura project? I started 5 years ago, secretly, a foundation disguised as a tech branch. It's designed to protect whistleblowers, children in war zones, women fleeing abuse. I funnel money through it to keep it hidden from people like Ruben. If they knew, they'd shut it down. Or worse, turn it into a weapon. We hide it from me because the less you knew, the safer you were. Until now. Elias stepped closer, his voice thick with something she hadn't heard before. Not fear, not guilt, but heartbreak. "They've found it, haven't they?" Ruben said things. Mira whispered things. He shouldn't know. Then it started. Elias said, "The real game. What do we do now?" "Do what we should have done from the beginning. We fight back, not just to protect each other, but everything we stand forth." Next day, everything escalated faster than either of them predicted. Ruben released forged documents claiming Mira's pregnancy was a calculated move, a trap set for inheritance. A fake DNA report leaked by an anonymous source suggested the child wasn't Elias's. Former employees were paid to speak lies on camera. Edited clips made Elias look like a man unraveling. But well, Ruben played dirty, Elias and Mira played honest. And sometimes truth is sharper than poison. The Azura files themselves revealed everything the foundation stood for. Held a press event, not with a stage or flashing lights, but inside the children's hospital. Azura had saved Mira, stood beside a mother whose child had received life-saving treatment thanks to the shadow money that had saved lives in silence. "This is what they want to destroy," she said, looking straight into the camera. "Not our names, not our future. They want to kill hope disguised as scandal." And that's when everything turned. Support flooded in again, but this time it wasn't from social media or headlines. It came from real people, families, charities, teachers. Women who had once been protected by Azura came forward and spoke the truth on record in tears. And in gratitude, they told the world that Elias Devon had done more in secret than most men do in the spotlight. Ruben's plan crumbled, not with a bang but with silence, as networks pulled his interviews, as sponsors withdrew, as board members refused his calls. One by one, his empire of whispers collapsed under the weight of real voice. And still, in the middle of all that noise, Mira held Elias's hand as if to say, "I am not afraid of your past, because I believe in the man you are now." Later that night, back at the penthouse, he looked at her across the firelight, the flames dancing in his eyes, and said, "I thought love was supposed to be soft. Sometimes it is," she replied, "and sometimes it's a sort of smile, then a tired, real smile. Then I thank God you're the one holding it." And in that moment, he wasn't a millionaire, and she wasn't a scandal. They were just two people who had walked through fire and chosen to keep walking together. But in the shadows, where no fire could reach, Ruben sat in the back seat of a black car, staring at the last remaining file that hadn't been exposed on, that still held a secret Elias hadn't told Mira, one that had nothing to do with business or headliness. It had to do with blood and birth, and a truth that, if revealed, would change everything again, because the war wasn't over yet, and love wasn't the only thing worth protecting. In the dark city pulsed with temporary peace, as if fate had paused to inhale, as if the storm had passed, only to gather its strength behind the next breath. Elias Devon sat at the edge of his world, watching the skyline from his office, not as a king ruling an empire, but as a man who had seen too much, lost too much, and was now standing on the edge of one more truth too dangerous to ignore. Mira stood behind him, watching the tightness in his shoulders, the way his hands gripped the windowsill like the glass could break, and he wouldn't feel it. He had told her everything about Azura, about Ruben, about the foundations, and the secrets buried behind forged contracts and closed doors. But there was one truth he hadn't spoken yet, and she could feel it waiting in the air between them like a loaded weapon, with no safety. "You've been quiet since the hospital press event," she said gently, stepping close. "We've been thinking about what about something I hoped would never surface, something I buried long before I met you." He turned then, and the look in his eyes told her this wasn't about business or public image or revenge. This was something older, deeper, personal. "Mira, something happened When I was 19th, words came slow, his voice. Low, not with shame, but with grief. He was young, arrogant, full of ideas. And too much trust in the wrong people. One night, after a tech summit in Oslo, I got drunk more than I ever had before. Woke up the next morning in someone else's hotel suite. Confused, half-dressed, and with no memory of how I got there. The woman was older, poised. She smiled and said it had all been mutual. I didn't question it, because the world taught me not to. Mira listened, her breath held, not because of jealousy, but because of what she already sensed was coming. Months later, she reached out, not to me, but to one of my early investors. Claimed I'd promised her money for her silence. She said she was pregnant. I denied it. The investor buried the story, paid her off. The deal closed, and I never saw her again. But she was pregnant, wasn't she? Mira asked, her voice barely a whisper. Nodded slowly. I think so, yes. But I never saw a child. No papers, no proof. Just a name she gave my lawyers before disappearing. Mira stepped back, stunned, her hand covering her mouth. What was the name? Mira Halian. The world tilted. Mira felt the floor shift beneath her feet, felt the air tighten in her lungs. She gripped the edge of the desk, trying to stay upright. Hale, she said barely, forming the word. Aria Haley. Elias met her gaze and nodded, the truth sharp and impossible to run from. She's Ruben's adopted daughter. He only found out a month ago. The name came up in one of the background checks we ran when he first went after you. My team connected the dots, her age, her mother's name, the timing, all of it fits. And he knows exactly who she is, and he's been waiting to use her, not against me, but against us. Mira stared at him in disbelief. You have a daughter, might Elias said, and that's the part that's killing me, because I don't know. And he's using her existence like a blade, pressing it to our lives, and waiting to see who bleeds first. Oh, you want to find Harry, don't just want to. I need to. Mira took a long breath, then said something that surprised even herself. Then let's find her together. The search began quietly. Private investigators, files, flights to small towns and cities, whispered interviews with people who had crossed paths with Aria Hale, now a 20-year-old woman known in Ruben's circles, but invisible outside the Mand. Then one day she stood at the edge of a gallery opening in New York, slender, sharp-eyed hair pulled back like her mother's had been, cold elegance radiating from her frame. Elias saw her from across the room, and the world seemed to freeze. Mira stood beside him as he approached, slowly, cautiously. No cameras, no headlines, no guards. Area, he said gently. She turned slowly, her eyes locking on his, her expression unreadable. I know who you are, she said. Before he could speak, the man who pretended not to remember the night my mother said changed her life, the man who left us with silence. I didn't know. He said, I swear to you, I didn't even know you existed until recently. She studied him like a puzzle that didn't quite fit, like something she had prepared to hate but wasn't sure how to break. And now that you do, she asked, what happens now? Now, Elias said, you choose if you want answers, if you want truth, or if you want distance. But whatever you choose, I will not walk away again. Mira stepped forward, then placing a gentle hand on Elias's back, not to claim him, but to steady him, to show Aria this is who he is now, the man who waited. Not the boy who ran. Aria's eyes flit between them, then down to Mira's stomach, the subtle curve beneath her coat. The new life still growing unseen. You're building something, she said, with quiet observation. We're building something, Mira replied, and you're part of it if you want to. Beria said nothing, just nodded once, and walked away into the crowd, but not quickly, not angrily, as if she needed space, but hadn't shut the door completely. That night, Elias stood on the balcony, holding Mira close, the city breathing below them, his voice low. And Shikani, never meant for you to carry this with me, and yet here I am, she said, still here, still choosing. Yao kissed her temple, then her mouth, then her hands, the same hands that had held him together when everything else tried to break him. And in the quiet of their high-rise world, a new possibility opened, one born not of clean beginnings, but of messy truths and the courage to meet them together. But somewhere far below, in a penthouse wrapped in steel and vengeance, Ruben Hale poured himself another drink, watching the footage of that gallery moment, frame by frame, smile curving slow and cruel across his face. Let him have her, he whispered to the empty room, because when she learns what her mother never told him, she'll be the one to burn his world down. Becau's love wasn't the only legacy Elias Devon had left behind, and some truths refused to stay buried forever. The rain returned, not as a storm, but as a whisper, soft and steady like a secret, washing through the cracks of a city that had forgotten how to rest. It fell against the windows of the Devon penthouse in quiet rhythm while inside the world of Elias and Mira stood on the edge of something irreversible. Mira lay curled on the couch, her fingers tracing slow circles over the curve of her stomach. Elias sat nearby, unread files scattered across the coffee table, untouched, his eyes staring at a single photograph, the one Arya had left behind. When she walked away, her mother's face faint in the background, caught in a reflection, young, beautiful, and haunted. She looked just like her. Elias whispered without lifting his gaze, and somehow nothing like heard. Almira sat up, watching him carefully. She had learned to read the moments that came before he unraveled, before he pulled himself into his silence too deep to climb out. If you're not afraid of her, she said, you're afraid of what she might. Nolias nodded slowly, the truth heavy in his throat. Ruben doesn't bluff. If he said there's something buried, it means he's had it all along, and he's waited for the perfect moment to use Ethan. We don't wait for him, she said, standing. We dig first. They didn't sleep that night. They went through everything from old encrypted servers to files from decades ago. Mira combed through notes, highlighted patterns, uncovered messages that made no sense until they lined up next to dates, places, names, and then they found it, a name they had never seen before. Corinne Haley. Elias froze. That was her legal name, her mother's name, not the one she used when she met me. She changed it later, when she married Ruben, and the timeline didn't match. Something was wrong. She had been listed as married to Ruben a year before the night she claimed to have conceived Arya, but that didn't make sense, not with what she told Elias, not with what the silence around Arya's birth had looked like. Mira stared at the screen, then whispered, she was already pregnant when you met here. Elias's hands gripped the edge of the table, his voice low, shaking. You think Arya's not Meneno? I think Arya doesn't know who her real father is because her mother lied to her the same way she lied to you. And now Ruben is using her to destroy both of you. Elias stood, then pacing the room, the weight of the past pressing down like iron. If Arya finds out she's not mine and not Ruben's, she'll fall apart. She built her whole identity around the revenge Ruben fed her, and we tell her, Mira said before he dusked. Next day Elias called her back. No media, no pressure, just a quiet invitation to talk. Arya came not because she trusted him, but because something in her eyes the last time she saw him told her he wasn't the monster Ruben painted him to be. And she stepped into the room. She carried herself like a blade, sharp, cautious, and dangerous. Said, you had answers, she said, her arms crossed. Adelia's nodded and slid the folder across the table. This is everything Corinne never told you. DNA, timelines, letters. Ruben intercepted. This is not about me or my name. This is about you finding the truth. You were stolen from. Maria opened the folder slowly, eyes scanning line after line, her face shifting from suspicion to shock to something far more vulnerable. Betrayal. Knew, she whispered. He knew this whole time, and he let me carry that hate like it was Minna needed a weapon. Elias said softly, and you were perfect because you believed him. Maria looked up, tears threatening, but her voice steady. So what now? You want me to forgive? You want me to be part of your family? You want you to be free? He said, not because of guilt or duty, but because you deserve to build your life on truth, not lies, not war. Mira stepped forward, placing a hand gently on Arya's shoulder. He never asked me to love him. He earned it by choosing to be the kind of man who walks away when it's easier to take. He would have done the same for you if she had let him. Maria stared at them both, and in her eyes something shifted. The ice cracked just enough for a seed of something else to take root. Not forgiveness, not yet, but maybe the beginning of. Itch walked out with the folder in her hands and didn't look back, but she didn't throw it away. Either a week passed, then another. The press quieted, the investors returned. The name Elias Devon was no longer surrounded by scandal, but by transformation. Not just because he had survived, but because he had refused to lose himself in the fight. Then, one night the doorbell rang, and when Elias opened it, Arya stood there, no makeup, no armor, just her eyes, and the question burning behind them. If I'm not your daughter, if I'm not his, who am I? Elias stepped aside and said gently, let's find out together. Arya stayed for dinner, not as a symbol, not as a statement, but as someone searching for a place to belong. And that night around the table, Mira, Elias, and the girl who once came to destroy them began something new, not because it was perfect, but because it was real. Months later, the baby came on a rainy afternoon. Just like the night everything began, Mira held their daughter in her arms, her skin warm, her breath soft against her chest. Elias sat beside her, tears silently falling down his face, not because he was afraid, but because for the first time in his life he felt safe. He named her. Hope not for what they had lost, but for what they had dared to keep. In the hospital waiting room, Arya sat alone, staring at the photo in her hand. Hers, a baby held by a woman who had lied and a man who had disappeared. She didn't cry, but she didn't let go of the picture. Myra walked in quietly, carrying the newborn wrapped in a sunflower blanket. She said nothing, just sat beside her and placed the baby gently into her arms. Arya looked down into the eyes of the little girl and whispered, "Your father waited for your mother, and that changed everything. Maybe that's what I was waiting for." Outside, the rain kept falling, but inside, a broken legacy had finally been rewritten, not with vengeance, not with victory, but with love that waited, love that told the truth, love that stood still when every force in the world demanded it. Moving, the millionaire who once walked away from desire now walked forward with everything he never knew he needed. Not power, not control, but a family built not from blood but from choice. And that choice made all the difference forever.